In many countries around the world, such as Australia, Hong Kong, and the United Kingdom, there are avenues for members of the public to purchase and preserve buses that have faithfully served the public for the last several decades. That being said, the bus companies themselves also play an active role in keeping vintage buses and occasionally deploying them at events where the public can enjoy them. Such events range from community joyrides to promoting the launch of a new bus route by using vintage buses that attracts the public attention. This helps to preserve the identity of the company as well as the memories of the millions of people who take the bus daily for work and leisure. It's such a priority that the funds from the government lottery in the UK are channeled to keep vintage buses in immaculate condition, as well as a heritage vehicle tax exemption for private owners, as owning a retired public bus is seen as a service to the country. Government funds are also used for the running of many volunteer-backed bus museums that are open to the public. In total, there are roughly 5,000 preserved buses in the UK. That's the same number of buses on service in Singapore. In 2019, I travelled to the UK for an event in London to commemorate 40 years since the retirement of the RF buses, which were in service from the early 1950s to 1979. During that event, many vintage buses, most of them more than 60 years old, were deployed on the same routes they served on in the past for the public to ride the buses free of charge. There were many elderly gentlemen on board whom I spoke to that said that they remember taking the exact bus to school back when it was new in the 1950s and were absolutely thrilled by the experience. For me, it might just be an old bus, but for them, I bet it was like a time machine, transporting them back to the days of their childhood. Now at this point you might be thinking, so what about in Singapore? Cars here are ridiculously expensive, costing around 3 times the typical price you would pay abroad. This results in the majority of the population being forced to rely on public transport for their daily commute. Surely, since there is a much greater reliance on buses here as compared to the UK, we should have a greater preservation effort for buses which the majority can relate to, right? No. Retired public buses are non-existent on Singapore roads. The Land Transport Authority has a firm belief that public buses automatically become unsafe death traps once they are over the age of 17 to 19 years old. Some of our retired buses have escaped the jaws of death by being exported to enjoy a second lease of life in countries where such baseless assumptions are absent. One such example is Thailand, where our old SBS Mercedes buses are still running on daily public service as of 2020, while approaching 30 years of age. Ever so often, 1 or 2 buses in Singapore do get converted into private static displays, but none of them for their heritage value, but for practical purposes such as a gym, a mobility training center, or even a student lounge. None of them are allowed to roam around the nation they once served, except 3 demonstrator buses that performed a short stint as a public bus before being acquired by private bus operators. Some SBS buses were also converted into mobile libraries for a few years before they were eventually scrapped. Don't tell me you don't miss the days of taking a non-aircon bus in the evening and just relaxing with the wind in your face, or peering down from the upper deck of the old double-decker buses and seeing the driver's face. Not to forget, the older buses will often have faulty speed limiters that allow them to travel way above the snail's pace of 60 km per hour set by the LTA. Oh, how I miss those thrilling high-speed rides. Or what about those sounds exclusive to the buses of yesteryear? Every single bus in the segment you have just seen have all been scrapped. When an old public bus from the 1960s was recently found rotting away in a private property, it was purchased by LTA and haphazardly restored without an engine. It went on to be exhibited to the public as a static display, and many Singaporeans managed to view and board the bus. But unfortunately, the bus was likely restored not with preserving history in mind, but to be used as a PR tool, tugging at the heartstrings of Singaporeans to draw attention to the new government bus contracting model scheme. It currently lies in an open parking lot exposed to the elements day in and day out. When it was announced that the classic flight information boards at Changi Airport Terminal 2 were going to be removed, many Singaporeans voiced their opinions and memories of the board. If a board that we see once in a while when travelling can bring to mind such strong nostalgic emotions, how much more would a moving bus that we spend nearly every day on with friends and loved ones, or even alone with your music plugged in as you escape into your own world where your current troubles pale into insignificance. In other countries, when it's time for a historically significant bus to be retired from public service, it is adored with banners and fresh new badges before being auctioned off to a collector or landing a spot in the museum, with the local media and bus company extremely active in covering the story. But in Singapore, the bus runs its last journey silently in the dead of the night without any fanfare whatsoever before fading into the background and eventually ending up in the scrapyard to be torn to pieces. It's heartbreaking that these buses here don't get the respect and recognition they deserve after a lifetime of service, especially now when there's a greater emphasis on self-driving and electric vehicles, a huge contrast to the vehicles of yesteryear. Obviously, it wouldn't be realistic to preserve the entire fleet, especially due to Singapore's limited land, but most companies do keep at least one unit of each model and auction off the rest to the public. I was thinking, perhaps we could have an arrangement similar to the classic car scheme, which grants the retired bus a limited number of days per year to be driven on the roads. Using vintage buses to encourage community interaction also creates more passionate young Singaporeans who would dream of pursuing a traditionally unpopular career as a bus captain. I decided to drop LTA an email to see what they had to say about all this. I included all the points about preservation efforts and schemes abroad that I talked about in this video and asked if there was any way that we could keep retired public buses running on the roads. Several weeks later, I got my response, and to be honest, it was just what I was expecting. Here it is. Thank you for your patience while we looked into your feedback on preservation of public buses. Please allow us to share that every public bus has a statutory lifespan of 17 years to ensure the condition of each bus is at optimal condition to serve our commuters. Upon reaching its statutory lifespan, it will be statutorily deregistered. We hope you understand that due to space constraints, we do not preserve buses in the Singapore Mobility Gallery. While we do not preserve them, the history of Singapore bus network can be found on SBS Transit's website. We hope the above information clarifies and helps. Once again, we thank you for writing in. So yeah, they basically confirmed that there is indeed no way to preserve buses on the roads and did not have anything to say about my suggestions. Using a vehicle's age as a sole basis to determine its condition is completely dubious. In New Zealand, do you really think that they will use ex-Singapore buses from the 90s to ferry children if they were really that unsafe? Even in the UK, we see ex-Hong Kong buses from the 90s being used as school buses. Kudos to the LTA staff though for actually replying to me and even going the extra mile to enclose that link, which actually, by the way, doesn't work, but let's not put the blame on her for that. If you must, direct your frustrations at the higher-ups in LTA who probably commute by car. I dare say that is why they fail to see the nostalgic factor to want to start a movement to preserve buses. In the past, all attempts to preserve significant buses have failed and they were all scrapped. Although we offered way more than the scrap value of the bus and even outlined our plans to export and register the bus abroad in countries with less stringent regulations since it was deemed too old and unsafe for Singapore. Outcomes of such attempts range from discussions going back and forth for more than a year to a bus company even going as far as to blatantly accuse us of wanting to preserve the bus for malicious purposes and scoffing at the fact that anybody would be interested in buses despite it being an internationally recognized hobby. However, one bus actually made it out of Singapore and is preserved in the UK. This Leyland Olympian is the last one ever produced and has the honour of being the sole operational bus ever preserved for its heritage value in original condition throughout Singapore's entire history. Even if you wanted to try to keep memories related to buses, it is still incredibly difficult. When all the old buses using plastic destination signs were retired from service, requesting to purchase those signs got us a reply from the company saying that the signs were protected items and they have to be disposed of. It is really typical of a Singaporean organisation to only render assistance if there is a tangible benefit for them. Our only solace is to purchase the parts from the scrapyard, but most yards are reluctant to do business and outright ban visitors due to safety or security concerns and rowdy behaviour from bus enthusiasts in the past. So okay, it's hard to keep the physical bits of the bus, but what about keeping digital memories? Taking photos and videos of buses in Singapore, especially in interchanges, will be met with swift resistance from security personnel and company staff who often make up their own fictitious rules despite several letters from bus companies being produced confirming that photography and videography is allowed. This atrocity is something that probably only happens in Singapore, where some people are paranoid about hypothetical danger. Instead of thanking us for doing our part to document history, we are accused of committing acts of terrorism and even treated like common criminals. I've filmed buses in all of these places and I have never once been questioned or stopped. There are actually some other ways to preserve memories, such as building your own miniature bus from scratch, but the high cost and engineering expertise required renders it out of reach for the most of us. Alternatively, you can also turn to smaller and cheaper static scale models or even digitally created models to drive in a simulator, but there are only a very small number of Singapore buses available. Hopefully this will increase in time to come. There are so many people in Singapore who love buses, and I feel that very little is being done to cater to this unique interest group, unlike in many other countries. I guess, at the end of the day, that is the reality of living in a place like Singapore, where history generally takes a back seat in our never-ending quest for modernisation. The message is repeatedly shoved down our throats that our interests don't matter. I'm a huge car enthusiast as well as a cat lover, and don't even get me started on how those interests are criminalised in Singapore. Unless you're a big shot, expect things like buildings or buses that you know and love to be locked behind a wall of red tape and bureaucracy until the inevitable happens and they are taken away from you one at a time.